Alright, so I wanted to make a video to cover what we went over today in class as a refresher. And so as a reminder, what we went over today was how to create a camera, how to create a display resolution for that so that we can see what will be rendered from that camera view, and how to affect some of the properties such as our gate mask, and then also how to do some basic things like overscanning. Okay, so let's review what all that means and look at how we can set some of that up. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so that we can have some things in our scene to look at from our camera's perspective, let's just drop in a few poly primitives. So I'm just going to move those around, and just remember all your tools are over here. So you have your move, your rotate, and your scale. I'm going to do my shortcut. I know we haven't talked about that in class, but just know that the tools are all over here. So move, rotate, and scale. And I'll review with you guys in class the shortcuts. Okay. So I'm going to drop a few things in here. And this will just give us something for our camera to see and focus on. Okay. Now we have a few primitives in here, and this will allow us just to have something to look at with our newly created camera. So let's go ahead and create a camera. And one way that we can do that is if we come up here to the very top left, we can go to Create. And if we come down to Cameras and over to Camera, we can create a basic camera. And that'll drop our camera into the scene. And we can rotate that, and we can try to aim that and so forth. But essentially, we don't know what that camera's seeing. We can see that it's looking in this direction, so we can make a guess about what it's seeing. Like I can say, I have a feeling that this piece is going to be in the view, this piece is going to be in the view, and so forth. But I don't really know. I'm actually guessing at that point. So we want to look through this camera so that we can see exactly what it sees. And so the way we can do that is if we come up to this little menu, we'll see View, we'll see Shading, Lighting, Show, Render, and Panels. If we click on Panels, we can see our perspective cameras. And if I go over, we'll see Camera 1. So all I need to do to look out of Camera 1 is come up here and select Camera 1. And now my view has changed to my Camera 1's perspective. And so now I can pull the camera around, and now I'm looking right through that camera. Okay, so this gives me a much better idea of what this camera is actually seeing. Depending on my aspect ratio, so I could have a very long but not very tall aspect ratio, and so it could actually, some of this stuff could go out of frame. Now I wouldn't necessarily know that unless I do a little more setup for this camera. So let's take a look at that. First off, let's select all of our polygon objects, and I'm going to do Control-G to group, and I'm just going to name that Geo, and then I'm going to change my Camera 1 to Render Cam. Okay. With my render camera selected over here, we want to come over here to the very right. So again, making sure that our workspace is set to Maya Classic. We want to come here all the way to the right, and we should see those three tabs: our attribute editor, our channel box, and then also our modeling toolkit. So we want to make sure that we're in our attribute editor. So if your view is like this, you just want to come over here and make sure you select the little tab all the way here to the right for the attribute editor. Okay, once in here, we'll see that we have two tabs. Okay. And this first tab just provides us some of the basic information for where this camera is in X, Y, and Z, its rotation, and so forth. Okay. We're not really going to focus too much on this tab right now. We're going to come over here to this render cam shape. Okay. And you should see something like this when you first pop in. And so a lot of this has just basic camera settings. And so like our focal length like for our 35 millimeters. And you could change this type of stuff too, right? So you could change this to an 8 millimeter and see how that looks. So as you pull that in, you'll start to see how that 8 millimeter has some camera pull on that and some effect on how that looks, right? Okay, so we can get some distortion and some pulls and things like that depending on our focal length. We're going to stick with the 35 millimeter. The main thing I want you guys to remember is if we scroll all the way down here, we're going to see this display options. And so if we click on that, that's going to open up a menu for our display options. And so Maya has just natively set up an aspect ratio for us. So if we click this display resolution, this little box for that, we'll see our resolution. So 960, so 960 pixels wide and 540 pixels tall. That's the aspect ratio for this camera. So I can see this little gray area up here is not going to be part of the render. And so this gives me a good way to start framing some of this. Okay, so we have this gray view that kind of shows us that, and that's kind of controlled through these properties right here, the gate mask opacity and the gate color. And so the opacity just dials up and down the opacity. So if I put that to 0, I can still see the box, but there's no opacity, there's no gray. And if I bring it all the way to 1, well, now it's a solid gray box, and I can't see through that at all. If we put it back to 0.7, which it natively does, I can see through that a little bit, but it definitely gives me a point of reference to what's not going to be in frame. Again, if we want to choose a different color other than this gray, we can do that, and that's this gate mask color. So if you click on that, you can come through this color wheel. So if you wanted this to be green, you could slide this over to green. Now it's still gray, and the reason why is this is on green, but this is desaturated on the left side and very saturated on the right side. So we need to take this from no saturation and drag that all the way over to the saturated side. And so then we can start to get color. And then we can drag that around to different colors and try different things out. And so this is a way that you can just kind of start to dial this in to get a look that feels good for your eyes and so forth. Okay. Feel free to play with all these boxes. I know we talked about some of these in class. I'm not going to have you focus too much on any one of these. If I turn any of these on, one of the things I do turn on fairly often is the display film pivot, because it just shows me that nice center point of my frame. The safe titles and things like that can kind of help depending on how you're exporting this. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it can also help you kind of visualize around where your thirds would be and so forth. Okay, the main thing I want you to focus on though is checking the box for the display resolution and then coming down here to overscan, because right now I get a good sense of what's not in frame up here and also on the bottom. So the top and the bottom, I get this nice visual representation for what's not in frame. But I can see if I look at this line that it's going off to the side, and so I don't know how far this extends. It looks like I'm capturing the edge right here, but I can't quite see where that's going off on the right side. So our overscan, if we set that to 1.25, well, that just backs, it does not change the camera, what the camera sees or anything. It's almost like we're taking a step back as we look through the camera, and so this is just giving us a better view of what the camera is seeing. And so from this perspective, we can see all this blue, and that is not going to be part of the final render. So when we click render, we can see the top of this box and the top of this torus. Those will not be in the render. And so this workflow gives us a nice way to frame things up and allow us to see exactly what's going to be inside of our frame when we start to do renders and so forth. So anyways, this has just been a review on how to set up cameras and the display resolutions, or play around with the gate mask and opacity and also the color, and then also the importance of overscan. And you can play with this overscan. You could change this to 1.15 if you wanted to zoom in a little bit closer, or maybe even 1.1 if you wanted to be a little closer. That'd be totally fine. I can still see the edges. Or maybe you want to take that a little bit further out and do a 1.5. So all these are totally fine. I tend to stick to around 1.25 because it just gives me a nice frame of reference, not too zoomed out, but I can definitely get a nice sense of what is not in frame. So anyways, I hope this has been helpful.